Hi everyone, Slangel here from Slangel Designs, and we're back today with another crocheting tutorial, and today we're going to take a look at the granny square chevron or the granny square ripple stitch. So this is a very quick and it's a very simple pattern. It has a starting foundation row and then you end up with a one row repeat all throughout. And you'll notice here on my sample swatch, I've done alternating. I've done 2 rows of one color, 1 row, 2, 1, just alternating. And the color combinations here are pretty much endless. And before we get started, I'm going to show you, I'm actually working on a crib size or a lapgan size blanket in this pattern, but I've modified it slightly. So I just want to show you some of the options. Now this here is done in multiples of 25 plus 3. So you'll see here in my sample, from here to here is 25, and this is another 25. So basically each chevron is one of the repeats. And just for size reference here, my sample is, I did 53 stitches, so 2 repeats plus the 3, and it's 13 inches across using the 4 weight yarn, worsted weight yarn, and the size 5.5 millimeter or US I9 hook. Now, depending on the yarn you're using or the hook you're using and how tight or loose you crochet, you're roughly going to get about the same. So when you go to do your starting chain, depending on how wide the blanket is you're looking for, just kind of judge that accordingly. And I have that little comment in the PDF pattern that's going to be posted on the website for you to download for free. I did comment that for a quick reference, my sample swatch of 53 starting chains gave me a sample size of 13 inches wide. So it kind of gives you a rough idea. Okay, so that's what this is going to look like. Now I'm going to show you something here. I can get, ooh, this is big. I'm working on it's the same pattern, but what I've done is every so many rows I'm doing a row of single crochet in an accent color, and this is like, my starting chain was over 200, so it's fairly wide, so this is why I'm having problems getting the whole thing in for you. But I was just playing around with it when I was doing it, and I'm not, well, I want to put a little bit of an accent color in, but I didn't want to use just all granny squares, so I did a row. I had to practice this one a couple times because I had to get the spacing right, because your stitches are a little different size wise. So I ended up, once I figured it out, it wasn't too bad. But just another little option. But it's a very nice, and it's cozy now too, that it's big enough when I'm working on it I can have it sitting on me. So anyway, that's that. So I have, you're gonna need a 5.5 millimeter hook if you're using the worsted weight yarn, pair of scissors, as always, your yarn needle for weaving in your ends, and I do have the 2 colors here. I am going to show you about the color changing at the ends. So again, this is a 1 row repeat once you get your foundation row done, and it's reversible, so there is no right or wrong side to this work, or front or back. Like, it looks the same on either side, so you don't need to worry about that. Because like you'll see here with the sample, there's one side looks the same, other side it looks the same, so there's no distinction, because some patterns and some stitches, like there is an obvious front and back to it. So one thing you'll notice in the pattern, like it uses the typical abbreviations you're going to find, like the chain, the double crochet, skip. You're going to see the abbreviation GC, and that stands for granny cluster, which is just 3 double crochets in the same space. So you'll see, like here, there's like 3 double crochets. That's a GC or a granny cluster. It just saves when you're typing out the pattern, it just saves having to write, put 3 double crochets in the next stitch, put 3 double crochets. So you just say granny cluster or GC. Okay, that's all that stands for. Nothing too complicated. So you're also going to notice you have your peaks and your valleys. You are always going to have 4 clusters on each. So 1, 2, 3, 4 going down, 1, 2, 3, 4 going up, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, once you get going, it goes pretty quickly. All right. So one thing too, when you are in a valley in here, you want to make sure that you're going to keep your work together, and I'll show you this when we get going, that you keep it in, pull it in a little snug so that you don't get great big gaps. You'll see what I mean when we get to that. All right. So for the sample, once again, I'm going to chain my 53, because it's multiples of 25 plus 3. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So if you want to chain your whatever sample size you're making, or if you're starting a full-on blanket, if you want to put me on pause, get your chain made, and then press play when you're ready to start the foundation row, and we'll meet back here in a second. Be right back. Okay, so we have our starting chain done. So I've got the 53 chains here, and if you have your 53 or however many you're doing, perfect. So for row 1, which is just our foundation row, what you're going to do is place a granny cluster in the 6th chain from the hook. And remember, the granny cluster is just 3 double crochets together. So you're going to count out 6 chains from the hook. Now remember, the one on your hook, it doesn't count. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So you're going to go in here, okay? So I'll just put my thumb there, and we're going to put a granny cluster. So we're going to do a double crochet. So that's 1, and then we're going to yarn over, put our hook in the same chain that we just did our last one, yarn over and pull through, so we have 3 loops on our hook, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over and pull through 2, and we'll do that one more time. Yarn over, put your hook in the exact same place you just did those other 2, so you got 3 loops on your hook, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over and pull through 2. That's your first granny cluster, okay? And this is, you'll see what we're going to be doing with this part here when we get back around to the other side, okay? It will all make sense. So, and I will also put a link to the tutorial for the double crochets and stuff in the description, as well as a link for the website to get the pattern, okay? So now you're going to skip 2 chains, 1, 2, and put a granny cluster in the next one. So yarn over, put your hook in, and I'm grabbing the 2. Some people like to grab the back loop. I just find this one sits a little nicely because it's a little tight to try to use the back loop if you're putting 3 double crochets in. So we're going to do 1 double crochet, yarn over, right back into that same spot, okay? Yarn over and pull through, so you got your 3 loops, yarn over through 2, yarn over through 2, and again, because our granny cluster is the 3 in one spot. So now you're going to skip 2 chains again and do another granny cluster. 1, 2. Your foundation row is going to be your slowest row because there's not a whole lot to hold on to right at the beginning, and so sometimes it can be a little flimsy, and you want to make sure you're getting your stitches and your clusters in the right spot, okay? But once you get this foundation row done, you're laughing, okay? So now we're going to skip 2 chains again and do another granny cluster. So 1, 2, granny cluster into the next. So that's 3 double crochets. And I'm just going to go slow so you can see what we're doing. And if you ever have any questions or need any kind of clarification on anything that is happening in the tutorial, please feel free to put it in the comments and I will get back to you. Now, we're going to chain 2. This is going to make our peak. okay? We're chaining 2. In the next chain space, you're going to put another granny cluster. And it can be a little tight because you just had a cluster in the one before that, so you have to kind of sometimes just wiggle your hook in there. There you go. And we're going to put a granny cluster, so that's the 3 double crochets, all in that same place. And this is what's making the peak. So you can see, remember how we said when we first started, you're going to have 4 clusters going up, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then this part of the peak is the first part of the ones going down. Okay. Whoop. My hook's escaping. So now you're going to skip 2 chains, and it's hard, sometimes it's crowded here, so you're going to see there's one kind of hidden there a little bit. So 1, 2, in the next one we're going to put our granny cluster, which is our 3 double crochets. You're going to get tired of hearing me saying that. Then we're going to skip 2 again. I think you're seeing the pattern here, and we're going to granny cluster. That's 2, and our 3rd. So now I'm looking here, 1, 2, 3. We're still not down to the valley yet because we have to have 4, remember? So we're going to skip 2, put our next granny cluster. And now that this will be our 4th, which means we're at the valley. And then, oh, yarn split. You'll see here what we're going to do. All right, so now we've got our 4 going down. So now it's a bit, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4. So for the valley, you're going to skip 5 stitches, 5 chains. So again, 1, it's hard to sometimes see here. There is 1 there because there's so much kind of crowded into that 1 chain, it can push it to the side a little bit. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So in the next chain, which would be in here, this is where I'm talking about you need to make sure your work is snug together, otherwise you're going to have quite the gap. So what we're going to do in that chain there is put our next granny cluster. And you want to kind of snug it up a little bit. 1, 2, and 3. Move that out of the way. So that makes the valley. So you're going to have, you will have a little bit of a loop, but you don't want this part here. When I say about snugging it together, you want this to be as close as you can so that you're not having it like spread out some, okay? So then we're going to skip 2 chains and granny cluster in the next. That's our 3 double crochets. Then we're going to skip 2 chains again, 1, 2, and then granny cluster. So we've got 3, so we need to go 1 more, skip 2, granny cluster. All right, so that should be 4 to bring us back up to the peak. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So we're going to, like we did before, we're going to chain 2. And in the very next chain space, we're not skipping 2, but in the very next chain space, we're going to put that next granny cluster. And the 3rd one there. Skip 2, 1, 2, And again, sometimes it's kind of, the first one after a cluster can be kind of hidden a little bit. My yarn's caught on something there. So you have to kind of sometimes spread it apart a little just to get a better view. And this is only in the foundation row because you're trying to put so much into such a tight space that sometimes, like you can see, that stitch is kind of hidden. You just have to kind of spread it a little bit. All right, so we'll skip 2 chains, and in the third one we'll put another cluster. We're getting near the end of the row here. And I'll show you what happens at the end. All right, so we've got 3. So here's our 4th one. We're going to skip 2, and our next one. And now don't panic. You're going to notice I have some chains left. You will too, or you should. So you're going to notice we have our 1, 2, 3, 4 going up, and you've got your peak, and what makes the peak contains one of the 4 from going up and the first one of the 4 going down. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, our valley, 1, 2, 3, 4, our peak, 1, 2, 3, 4. But now we've got 3 chains left, which you should, okay? So at the end of the row, you've got these 3 left. You're going to put a double crochet in the last chain, okay? Come on. Helps if my fingers will work for me here. You put a double crochet in that last chain. I'm just going to tighten up my, there. So there you go. So that's the end of the first row, and that's your foundation row. So now row 2 is what you're going to repeat all throughout the rest of the project. So however long you want to make this. So you're going to chain 3. Okay, I don't know how many I just did because I wasn't paying attention to my own. Chain 3. 1, 2, 3. Turn your work. Now, you're always going to, it seems like it's a bit of a stretch, and you won't notice what happens until you get a few rows in. But when you look at this, it ends up being a straight line, okay? You won't notice that until you get going into a few rows and make a bit of progress with it, okay? So what you're going to do is put a granny cluster in the first, you're going to skip the turning chain area. In the first space between the first two granny clusters, you're putting another granny cluster. And when I first did this pattern, I was a little worried because I was like, this doesn't look right here. Why is that so stretched over? But it's going to, because it has to start going up straight this way. Okay, because don't forget you are doing like a chevron pattern. And so it will have to move up on an angle. So then you're going to do a granny cluster in the next space. And you'll notice there's no extra chains between the granny clusters or anything like that, okay? So then a granny cluster in the next one. And remember, there's 4 granny clusters going up and 4 granny clusters going down. So we've gotten 3. So in that chain 2 space from the peak and the previous row, we're going to put a piece of lint, apparently, a granny cluster, and then we're at the peak, so we're going to do our chain 2 and put a granny cluster in the exact same chain 2 space you just put that other one, and that will make the peak. And that peak has the granny cluster that is part of the row going up and the first one of the row going down. So now what we're going to do is we're going to granny cluster in the next space between the granny clusters below. And we're going to do this until we get down to the valley, okay? So again, granny cluster in the next space between the next two granny clusters from below. I know I'm going a little faster. So we've got 1, 2, 3. So we need to put one more. Oops. All right, so that, you'll notice we have 1, 2, 3, 4, which brings us down to the valley. And what you're going to do for the valley is you're going to, the next stitch, the next granny cluster, you're skipping here. The next granny cluster is going to go into this space over here. So this is where I'm saying, when you go to do your granny cluster, you're gonna yarn over and put your hook in, yarn over, pull your yarn through. This is where you wanna try to get it as snug as you can. Try to get this piece here as close to the loop on your hook, so that when you do your, and I have to sometimes kind of hold it together with my thumb so it doesn't spread apart on me until I finish that first stitch. And then we're gonna put our other 2 double crochets in there to make that granny cluster. So there, it causes the valley, okay? So by having it nice and snug, there's not a great big gap between those 2 clusters, okay? So then let's work our way up to the peak again. So we're gonna put a granny cluster in the next space. And you're wrapping that yarn, you're not going into individual stitches, you're just going into the space between them. So you're not like going in, you just go in and through. So we're back up to the peak. So we're going to put a double or a granny cluster into that chain 2 space of the peak, and then we're going to chain 2, and then another granny cluster in the exact same chain 2 space from below. Then we're going to work our way down to the end of the row. So we're going to put a granny cluster in the next space. And when we get to the end of this row, I'm going to show you about changing the colors, okay? And we'll do another row of the color change. And this is the row that you're going to repeat over and over again until you have the desired length of your project, okay? All right, so we've got 1, 2, 3, so we need to do one more. And 4 is your magic number. Remember, 4 clusters up and down each side. Now, so we've got our 4 clusters, like you can see there. And then we have the chain, which is our turning chain. So what you're going to do is you're going to put a double crochet in the top of that turning chain. And that's how you're going to finish off each side, okay? Then you're going to chain, but I got ahead of myself. We're going to change colors. So you're going to do a double crochet in the top of that chain. So yarn over, pull through. So you got your 3 loops on your hook. To get a nice even color change, yarn over and pull through the first 2, stop. I'm going to cut my yarn, bring in my new color, and we're going to finish the double crochet with the new color. And that makes, and then I'm going to just tie my ends, which I'll weave in later, okay? Oh, shoot. I pulled the wrong one. 1 second. Technical difficulties. Happens to everybody. All right, back to where we need to be. And I'm going to yarn over and pull through. Grab the right 2 ends. and tie that off and just knot it. So there. So now when we go to start our chain 3 for our turn, 1, 2, 3, we have a nice even color change, okay? So then we're going to turn our work, and I'm just going to tuck these in behind. I'll weave them in after, actually. So then we're going to do what we did like last row. We're skipping this space made by the chain 3. We're going to go into the first space between the 2 granny squares and put a granny cluster, or between the 2 granny clusters, sorry. And then we're going to granny cluster in the next space. And again, I know I've picked up the speed here, so I just want to get, hopefully you're familiar with the clusters now. So we're at the peak, granny cluster. This is a pretty color yarn. I'm just using scraps of what I had, and so I don't know what the color is. I know it's a worsted weight because that's typically what I use, but so now we're going to chain 2, but I like the color. It's not really green, but it's not blue either. I kind of wish I had the label. All right, so that finishes the peak, and we're going to work our way down the valley. So granny cluster in the next space. So you can see how this will start to go fairly quickly because it does become quite repetitive, and this is a good little pattern to work on while you're watching TV or something. Yeah, I really like this yarn color. I'll have to take it with me next time I go to Michael's and see if I can try to match it up. The problem is some of my yarn that I have from projects before, a lot of times yarn's getting discontinued, and I don't know what that's all about because it's got to be popular. All right, so we've got our 4. We're at the valley. So let me focus here for you. So we've got our 4 going down, so we're at the valley. You never put anything in here, you're skipping that one. You're going to put a cluster in the next space, and remember, this is where you need to snug it up so that you can get your edges together nicely so that you don't have a big gap. I hold, which can be a little awkward at times. But by holding it, it keeps those edges close together as possible so that you get a nice valley. And then we'll work our way up the side to get to the peak. But yeah, yarn is so hit and miss at Michael's lately. And Michael's, we have a Michael's and a Walmart. We don't have anything like Hobby Lobby or anything here in Canada, in my area anyway. So Michael's is my pretty much go-to for my yarn supplies. If I'm desperate enough, I'll order online from some places, but you end up paying quite a bit in shipping sometimes. So we're at the peak, so we're going to put a granny cluster. And I just find lately the shelves are pretty bare for some of the yarn because we only have really one spot to grab yarn, chain 2. But not only that, just speaking with one of the employees, she said there's some supply chain issues still, and some brands are actually being discontinued because whether they just weren't popular enough or whatever. So we're going to work our way down towards the end here. So it's kind of a shame, especially if there's a yarn you like or a color combination, that I find some brands, some colors just aren't the same unless you get it with a certain, like I could find something similar like in the Craft Smart yarn and then say that yarn, I know Craft Smart's going to be there, but say you have a Bernat Super Saver and you're like, oh, I really like that color, but then all of a sudden Bernat doesn't make that color anymore, or you just can't get it. There's nothing really comparable in another one because that was like the color. All right, so we've got our 4 granny clusters. We're at the end. We're going to do a double crochet in the top of that turning chain. And if you're wondering where the top of the chain is, 1, 2, 3. Count 3 up. put your hook in and do a double crochet. Then you're going to chain 3, turn your work, and then just do the exact same. You're going to always skip this one. You're going to granny cluster in this, chain 2, another granny cluster to work down your peak. So I'll just keep going for another row with you here. So once again, I want to thank everybody for the support of the channel. I really do appreciate it, and hopefully you're finding these tutorials helpful. I did start with adding some knitting ones, and there's a couple more already filmed and uploaded, but they're scheduled to come out. Just got a busy couple weeks coming up, so I've been trying to get ahead of the game and schedule some things to come out down the road. So just kind of introducing some of the basics for the knitting, just different how to cast on and some different the knit and the purl stitches and stuff. And then I think I'm going to show you how to do a scarf in a nice little pattern that's reversible, so the scarf doesn't have to be worn a certain way. You can just grab it and throw it on, and it's very adjustable for the size, for the length, if you want to make it for a child or for yourself or whatnot. Makes a nice little gift. And it's done, it looks like a fancy pattern, but it's just done with the knit and the purl stitches, so that you can practice those if you're just learning. So it's a fairly straightforward, nice beginner, nice project for practicing your learning. And we got lots of other projects planned coming up for crocheting, especially with the holidays coming. There's going to be some holiday themed projects, like I posted about the snowman ornament. We're going to be doing that, as well as possibly a snowman pillow. All right, so we're at the valley. Remember, skip into this one here, so you can bring it together, and this is where we're snugging together, nice and tight. There we go. So lots of things coming up, and as I said, I've said before, if you know of anybody who might find the channel useful or interesting or helpful in any way, please feel free to send them our way, and it helps the channel grow. And this is a community effort too, right? Like, hopefully, like, there could be things that I might not know, and somebody might mention it in a comment or something, and we can kind of go from there. And if there's things you want to see, post about that, and I'll see what I can do. And because who knows too, if you have a question, ask it in the comments, because maybe someone else is having the same question too, but they're just not sure about how to ask or what to ask to clarify, and it might help somebody else out too. So, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button. That helps. All right. So as you can see, this goes pretty quickly. We haven't been at this too long. Whoop. I know I'm going faster, but we were just chit-chatting here. All right. If you need to go back and watch row 2, you can always do that, because I know I did it slower then. We're at the end, so we're going to put a double crochet in the top of the chain 3 space to finish off our row. And now we've done, actually what I will do is I'm going to cut this one, because I would go back to my other color, because I did 2 rows of one, 2 rows of this one. I'll tie this off. I do recommend weaving your ends in as you go too, because if you're going to be changing every row, every 2 rows, or whatever your pattern combination you want to do is, you're going to end up with a lot of ends if you don't keep on top of them. And that can be very, very daunting at the end of a project. So then we would just chain 3 and then just keep on going. So you can see that it's a very pretty pattern, and the color combinations really, you could use more than 2 colors if you wanted. You could use 1 color. Totally up to you. It's very customizable. And again, if you do decide to use yarn that's not worsted weight, just use the hook size recommended on your yarn label. And just something to keep in mind too is your size of your chevrons will be different. So to determine the width of your project, you're going to have to maybe do a quick sample, just measure how wide that is, and then figure out how many multiples plus the 3 you would need to get the width of the project you want. This makes a really nice baby blanket too if you use the baby yarn. All right, so let's see. So see, I already got like quite a few ends to weave in there. But there we go. So you can kind of see, you get your nice chevron pattern, and it works up super quick and easy. So that is the granny square chevron or granny square ripple stitch. It's a nice 1-row repeat. Goes super quick. If you do happen to make one, I'd love to see a picture of your project, just to see the color combinations you use, because sometimes that can be inspiration for other people as well. So that's it for today's tutorial. Thank you for watching. I appreciate it. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And I hope you have a fantastic day and happy crocheting. And take care, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.